Um, cool. So yeah, everyone, welcome to this webinar on DevOps growing pains. I'm sure everyone knows that DevOps is an increasingly potent topic in the ecosystem, shall we say, with a lot of people not knowing best practices and things like that. So hopefully this webinar will help debug a lot of those. Cool. So here's the agenda that we're going to go through. So we're going to start off with some introductions. Then we're going to talk about today's landscape, the importance of a center of excellence, the different components within a center of excellence, the benefits of building a center of excellence. Finally, we're going to have a case study just before we're going to go through some Q&As that anyone has sent in. Cool. So I'm Andrew Cook, Salesforce technical trainer at Salesforce Ben. I'm being joined by Chintan Adhyapak, senior architect from West Monroe, and Jacob Scheff, director of enablement at AutoRABIT.
Thank you, Andrew. So as Andrew said, my name is Chintan Adhyapak. I'm a senior architect with West Monroe. We are a digital consultancy firm based out of Chicago. And I've been sort of working in the Salesforce ecosystem for the last 10 plus years now, doing Salesforce implementations. So very happy to be here.
And as Andrew alluded to, my name is Jacob Scheff. I am the director of enablement at AutoRABIT. We are the premier DevSecOps platform specifically for Salesforce. And I work with our internal employees to better help them understand the problems that Salesforce teams face on a daily basis.
All right, let's get into it. So if you look at the economic outlook today in the general business climate, I'm sure it will come as no surprise to read that rising inflation, labor shortages, supply chain disruptions, and sort of rapidly changing consumer behaviors are the high impact events that are certainly top of the mind for CEOs and other C-suite executives here in the United States for sure, and broadly speaking, I'm sure the world over. So just to put some numbers behind that, 44% of C-suite leaders say that this crisis, and by crisis they mean the pandemic that we've just kind of gone through, will fundamentally alter the way they approach remote work in the long term. And this obviously comes as no surprise. You and I, all of us have been impacted by the effects of the pandemic and the whole remote work thing that we're all still going through. Similarly, in a poll conducted by West Monroe of C-suite leaders, 65% said that they will work faster and with more agility because of this crisis. So if you kind of think about the one thing that has come out of this last 2 or 3 years, it is that leaders and organizations have seen what is technologically possible while still being remote, for example. And because of that, they will now expect to be able to work with digital proficiency, higher digital proficiency, higher speed the next time they interact with their institutions. And similarly, on the left-hand side of the slide, if I talk about the financial services world, and that's the world I live and breathe in a survey conducted by FIS, 45% of those polled said that they have permanently changed how they interact with the bank. Now, this probably is not that big a deal with bigger banks and how they've interacted with their clients and conducted business. But if you look at the small business sector, small business lending, SBA lenders, or agricultural lenders, for example, this is a dramatic shift in how business has traditionally been done for generations, how they meet people, how deals are done and all of that. It's, moving online is a dramatic shift in that. Similarly, from the consumer side of things, 3 out of 10 consumers said that they increase their use of online and mobile banking. Again, not that big of a shift for big time retail banking, but for small businesses and agricultural, commercial lenders, small business stuff. This is a dramatic shift. So what is kind of all of that telling us, if you put it all together? It's that leaders and organizations, because of the changes that we've gone through recently, are going to look for accelerated delivery and improved ROI.
And these trends that Chintan is alluding to and pointing to, they're consistent throughout the Salesforce ecosystem as well. An IDC report from last September estimates that by 2026, jobs within the Salesforce ecosystem, so jobs working directly on Salesforce within Salesforce's customer base, will balloon up to 14 million positions. Simultaneously, they also predict that a massive skills gap, with nearly 40% of these jobs, are going to require candidates to acquire new digital skills to adequately fill these vacancies. This trend means that thousands and thousands of new Salesforce developers are going to be entering the workforce every year. And the pool of talent in aggregate is going to get younger and less experienced over time. Now, Salesforce has done a great job of promoting trailhead certifications and putting people in positions to learn the skills needed to fill these gaps. The issue is that these individuals don't have a foundation in DevOps on any other platform. This means that they're often going to overlook the fact that Salesforce was built as a CRM, not a dev platform. And because of this, there are unique issues that need to be solved. And it's this fact that leads to most of the issues that we see teams struggle with. They're trying to implement general DevOps standards and tools into Salesforce development without considering the limitations that Salesforce has from a development perspective. And this complexity can cause developers, especially those who are still learning, still growing in their careers, it causes them to lose focus on the only priority that they should ever really have: to promote only clean, safe code. Instead, developers can get distracted, overwhelmed, and bogged down by the issues that regularly arise when using tools that aren't built for the job. To avoid disaster, you need to make sure that your Salesforce practice has guardrails. Now, this is vital because for most companies, Salesforce is your largest container of sensitive customer data. A single mistake or error can cost you millions. But when you really start to analyze all the different aspects of a Salesforce practice that really need to be locked down, it can quickly become unmanageable for a release manager or a senior dev. These individuals are already tasked with delivering business capabilities. They're not necessarily thinking about process, standards, and regulations. The act of governing Salesforce it's really its own function. You need to manage standard development best practices like coding and documentation standards. You also need to approve tools, stay ahead of any new changes hitting the ecosystem, and handle internal business stakeholders. Now, this is already a ton of responsibility, but considering most companies have multiple Salesforce instances, the work to enforce standards across all of those instances is almost an insurmountable task.
So if you kind of heard everything that Jacob and I just talked about, some of the strategic issues that I talked about, and the more tactical ones that Jacob pointed out, those, all of them, in my mind, answer the question of why you need a center of excellence, right? Next, let us sort of look at what is a center of excellence, or a definition of the center of excellence. A center of excellence is a centralized division within a company that overlooks and manages all the various aspects of a particular area of interest. And what we are talking about today, for that matter, is the Salesforce instance, or DevOps, or everything around Salesforce instance. So that includes project work, delivering new capabilities, new enhancements. It includes maintenance of existing functionality, and then the overall support structure of the Salesforce instance. Now, this team that you put together that'll make up the center of excellence has direct relationships with multiple stakeholders throughout this company. This is an idea that I like to talk about a lot, and I'll get into it shortly. And who are these people that make up the center of excellence? Why are they chosen? What are the roles that they play? The fact that they have oversight, or they have at least a hand in all of the various areas of operations that are impacted by your Salesforce instance. And what is it that they do? They guide all the decision making. So if you look at the yellow highlighted words on this slide, for example, that really tells me the definition of a center of excellence, that it is a centralized, why centralized, I'll get into that, organizational division. What does it do? It overlooks and manages. And how does it, basically what's the end goal? It guides all the decision making. So when you think of that definition of a center of excellence, it is, hopefully you can clearly see that it's not just DevOps or not just Salesforce operations that a center of excellence can benefit, but really any organizational corporate initiative, a center of excellence can benefit, and that is the broad lens that you'll hear me talk throughout this presentation today, that I like to look at it. And that's the 50,000 foot view, so to speak, that I like to look at a center of excellence, at in terms of your organization and what it can do for you. So now that we've defined what a center of excellence is, let us look at what are the components of the center of excellence. Now, just like any good process or initiative, no surprise, I'm sure, to hear that the three main components of a center of excellence are people, process, and technology. Now, let's look into each of those a little bit more carefully. Let's start with people. Now, I'm a big believer of the idea that user behavior is driven in any company or organization from the top down, right? And that could be company culture, that could be operational direction, that could be tactical direction, that could be decisions we make. It's all really driven by how leadership in that company behaves. And that is why if you look at that top of the pyramid on the left, the people pyramid, executive sponsors, leadership council, it's critical to get buy-in and participation from top leadership in the company when you think about starting to put together a center of excellence. Getting those folks in, it's going to ensure that this initiative is going to not falter in the short or long term, and you have higher likelihood of success. Then you look at the bottom of the pyramid. Now, this is interesting to me as well. These are the end users, the actual users, folks like you and me, who actually use Salesforce or in whatever initiative you're targeting in a day-to-day, the capacity. The business matter experts, their subject leaders, their managers, business analysts, folks like that. Why is it important to get those guys involved in a center of excellence? For two good reasons that I can think of. One, without their participation, a lot of times corporate initiatives can feel like something that is force-fed. Now, how many times do we get invited to a meeting, something brand new, we internally think, oh great, another meeting that I have to attend now in a week on top of everything else that I got to do. So that's sort of to make sure that doesn't happen, you actually involve the people who are going to be impacted by that. And two, along similar lines, buy-in, right? If you're not actually taking input from the folks who are using the application daily, then how do you actually know what are the high impact problems that you are going to attempt to solve here, right? So making sure you get their input into the process and then act on those initiatives is going to ensure that you'll not fail or stutter in the long run. Right? Next is process. Just like any initiative, however well-meaning, unless there are processes that are in place that will make sure that the effort is moving in the correct direction consistently, you need those processes. And these are your typical project management type processes. And how are we going to collect feedback? How are we going to prioritize it? Who's going to make those decisions? Cadence for meetings, for example. And how many initiatives have you been involved in where if you meet too infrequently, you lose interest of the people. If you meet too frequently, the same thing happens. So identifying the correct cadence, staffing, all of that structure, all of that process needs to be in place. And finally, typically the outcome of a DevOps Center of Excellence, but if it's any other initiative, the technology, right? So let me stop briefly here for a second to talk about the technology that is impacted from the point of view of DevOps, right? So a good DevOps process will typically involve checking in changes that your developers are making into a version control. Even before that, maybe you've got project management applications like Jira, where maybe you're tracking everything that you're changing for a user story. Then you've got your version control itself. And that could be GitHub, Azure DevOps, what have you. If you've got multiple people working on the same initiative or multiple development initiatives in place at the same time, which is very common in large institutions, then you need a good branching strategy in your DevOps, right? Then when you check in, you're going to need some kind of a process to automatically or continuously deploy or test those changes. This is where I believe AutoRABIT as a tool shines to a large extent in our experience here at West Monroe. It's got a seamless integration with project management tools like Jira, seamless integration with version control applications. It's got a built-in CI engine like Jenkins that'll automatically deploy on check-in or automatically deploy on merging of branches if you structure your branching strategy accordingly. And it's got capabilities around static code analysis, that'll make sure that the code your developers are checking in is going to conform to security standards or other standards that you want to enforce at a company, right? So all of that technology is also a key component of making sure that your center of excellence is going to succeed in the long run. Now that you talked about the components of the center of excellence, let's start thinking about how to start building a center of excellence. The age-old adage of crawl, walk, run applies here as well in my mind. Start small. You want to succeed, you want to start small with a bare minimum, maybe not bare minimum, but a small number of people. So again, that yellow highlighted executive sponsor, top of the pyramid, definitely need to involve them. Product owners, if you got product owners who own the Salesforce install in your organization, you want to make sure you have those. And then the bottom of the pyramid folks, the business, technology, subject matter experts, the end users, so that you can identify some big stumbling block that you're trying to address, right? Start small, identify that. Why do we want to do that? Because, when you start small and you take on something small but meaningful, and you're able to solve that issue in a reasonable amount of time, what do you have? You provide value. As soon as you provide value, your end users are going to start seeing the benefit of what you've done. They're going to start seeing, hey, my day-to-day life has improved. The business leaders are going to start seeing the business values they're going to get from it, and therefore you'll automatically get bigger buy-in. You'll automatically get maybe more budget if that's what you need, staffing, prioritization. All of that will start to fall into place once you start providing value, once you start succeeding. And the most likely way to get there is to start small, take something small. Once you've had success now and you've got some experience doing it, you can now take on bigger and more strategic issues, grow the size of the team, bring in people from different lines of business, for example, and start handling, start scaling, start delivering bigger and better, more meaningful, more impactful problems as you scale and move on.
As Chintan alluded to, your Salesforce Center of Excellence, it should include a wide array of individuals, ranging in seniority, role, and focus. This is going to allow you to better drive initiatives that support the goals of the organization, not just specific stakeholder groups. But when we consider the people element of people, process, and technology, one of the first things you're going to want to do is understand where the skills of your overall team lie today. When we first start working with customers, one of the first things we do very early on is try to understand what skill level the team possesses today. Is the team predominantly writing declarative changes for Salesforce, or are they writing a lot of custom code? What style of release process are they utilizing today? Are they familiar with version control? Do they understand the need for static code analysis in a release flow? Asking these questions can help your COE very early on, set milestones and objectives that are achievable, as well as plan education to upskill your existing team. Now, process, ironically discussed second in this presentation, it's actually the thing you want to define first. Through working with our customers, what we've learned is that your process needs to be baked before discussing technology or people. You could have the perfect team in place and the ideal tech stack selected, but if you don't have the correct process in place, all you're doing is accelerating towards issues. Now, there are many elements that you want to define in your process or processes that your COE is going to govern. But when looking at your DevOps process, one element that we found to be crucial to our customer success is the need for feedback as early and as often as you can achieve. You want to create a process that pushes value towards your end users while simultaneously delivering feedback back to your developers. For example, ideally, When a developer writes their changes, they can get real-time highlights that show them exactly which lines of code aren't clean or safe and why, and how to fix it. This focus can reduce rework, reduce non-compliant code, and ultimately lead to faster release velocities. We've seen firsthand examples of customers who used to release quarterly, now releasing hundreds of times per day. This type of feedback can be enabled by instilling the right individuals who place an emphasis on communication, or with the right tools. Static code analysis and certain release tools can aid in this focus, but the driver of feedback needs to be predominantly built into your process.
I couldn't agree more, Jacob, what you said about process being, sort of the middle of this people process technology, set. But to continue that discussion, that idea, the next thing when you start to build a center of excellence is to define a governance framework. Now, when I think about a governance framework, to me, it sort of straddles that people and process pillars of the structure, right? The people side of it is the governance structure, is the system of roles, committees, councils, call them what you want, that make sure that the decisions and actions are aligned with that vision. And what is that vision? That's that, start simple, that goal that you identified, that your center of excellence is trying to solve. And then the other side of it is the governance process itself. What are those? What is that? Or that's the policies and the procedures that help this governance structure promote decision making and take actions that support that goal and that support sustained adoption and continuous improvement. You just kind of, I think, talked about feedback on your previous slide, Jacob, and the same idea here. Very key idea in my mind, sustained adoption and continuous improvement. How many efforts have we been a part of where, it's well-meaning and you bring out a change that is very impactful, meaningful, and it does make an impact, but give it 6 months in the year, people forget and you fall back to your old habits. This is one big idea that governance framework can help alleviate. And I can think of an example. We're here at West Monroe, for example, a few years ago, we deployed Sales Cloud to a small company. And the problem that leadership was noticing after we went live with Sales Cloud was that their leads and opportunities were not being registered in Salesforce by their sales people. And this is not a very uncommon problem. The reason for that is they're used to doing things their own way. They've got a little notebook with their list of opportunities and leads, and they don't want to share that because they're proprietary. They kind of want to be possessive about those opportunities because their commissions depend on it, right? Now, this is not a good outcome from the company standpoint, right? Because if you think about it, this book of business is not really something, it's a corporate asset, it's a company asset, and not something that the sales reps can walk away with, for example, if they choose to leave, right? So they came up with creating a process where they would not pay out commissions on those sales unless the opportunities and leads were first logged into Salesforce. You heard a little bit to the sales reps initially, but slowly but surely that change happened, and then they could start seeing the true benefit of doing that through the entire organization. Now you've got opened up opportunities for cross-selling, upselling, because all the data is in there. The entire 360 view of the customer sort of started to become real. This is sort of the example of a framework that I'm talking about here, putting together the right structure, the right people who can enforce them, and then coming up with processes that help you achieve that goal. This is something that a center of excellence can succeed in if you've got this in place. And then I talked a little bit earlier about tools, about a lot of those DevOps related tools for version control, CI/CD, things of that nature. But that typically in the context of a DevOps COE, that is the outcome. I mean, that is the end result. That is hopefully what the COE will recommend at the end of its initial exercise, that hey, these are the tools that we need to standardize on. But in order to reach there, in order for this center of excellence to function, it needs some support tools in its, within itself, within its own workings, and that some samples of that, some examples of that are shown here. For example, the initial identification log, Jacob talked about that as well. Feedback, the idea of feedback, right? So how do you collect input from the end users using something like an initiative identification log? How do you prioritize that using a color coding, like green, yellow, red? That's something that all of us work very effectively, me included. And that makes it very clear what are the high impact issues that we want to prioritize. That makes it clear to the leadership what are the initiatives that we want to focus on. And then a project plan, a plan to get there. How do we get there? What kind of timeline, what kind of resource, what kind of staffing do we need? So those tools are going to aid that governance framework that I talked about in order to effectively allow the Sales Center of Excellence to reach its goal.
That's exactly right. And as Chintan alluded to, a large part of a Center of Excellence's responsibility is to evaluate new tools as well as standardize these tools across the various orgs you may have in your company. Now, this is especially true for tools that touch your release pipeline. When you begin to evaluate DevOps tools, you want to make sure that you're considering the process and the people that you have today, but also the goals of your Salesforce development program over the long term. Here at AutoRABIT, one reason we see companies adopt our tools is because they have outgrown the tool that they originally selected and can no longer release without developers stepping on each other's toes, accidentally overwriting components, creating errors, etc. Now, evaluations for a company are very time-consuming and expensive. So you want to make sure that the tool that you select early on, it can scale with you as you continue to grow. Another thing that you want to consider is the security of the tool you select. Does it fit into your own internal security guidelines? We've seen plenty of companies spend months evaluating a release tool, only to find out that it doesn't meet their internal security standards. A great example of a security standard that we see roadblock teams all the time is just simply understanding how the tool is hosted. CI/CD pipelines are a prime target for cyber attacks. So most InfoSec teams require DevOps tools, especially those that touch Salesforce, to be hosted on-prem or at the very least on a single tenant server. Because of this, we urge Salesforce Center of Excellence leaders to get their InfoSec colleagues involved in the evaluation process as soon as possible to avoid these nightmare scenarios. And then finally, when you're looking at release tools, you want to remember what the whole purpose of setting up a Salesforce Center of Excellence is: to have solutions specifically for addressing the problems that you have on Salesforce. From our experience, when you start to unpack this, what a lot of our customers start to realize is they can't solve the bottlenecks that they're facing with tools that are they themselves hosted on the Salesforce platform. There's just too many limitations involved. Having a tool that doesn't rely on Salesforce for the back end allows you to have much more autonomy in your release process. A few examples of this could be properly versioning Salesforce in version control, deploying only the changes you want to promote to higher environments, and being able to pick the release flow strategy that matches your team's skill sets. This is why understanding the architecture of the tool you select is crucial to finding the right platform for your organization.
That's right, Jacob. So as you think about building a center of excellence, one of the ideas that is important, and kind of harping about this for a little while now, is to create a simple goal and then provide clarity around that goals and plans. Right. So here are some sample COE goals, and as I said earlier, I tend to look at the center of excellence from a broader lens and not necessarily just DevOps. So transfer of best practices or consistent standards and controls. And these are ideas that definitely apply within a DevOps center of excellence as well. How many times have we seen every developer doing their own thing, for example, variable names need to begin with lowercase, for example, class names in uppercase, constants, class, all lowercase, or LWC names in camel case. Maybe those are the kinds of standardization and best practices that you want to enforce. That's something a center of excellence can take on. Accountability for performance. This is in the financial services sector, for example, a very common idea. You've got various lines of businesses. You've got mortgage divisions, you've got small business divisions, you've got commercial loan divisions. They've all got their different priorities. How do you make sure that whatever the center of excellence or whatever process that you are advocating, all lines of businesses adhere to that? So accountability for performance, maybe that's a goal that center of excellence can take on. And then building the capabilities. This is an excellent one as well. Whether you're a services company like West Monroe, whether you're a product company like AutoRABIT, or somewhere in between, that's something that all organizations are looking to do. Build on the capabilities that they are able to provide. So these are some sample COE goals that you can look at in your organization to help improve performance on. And then a plan, right? When I think about a plan to help deliver that, I tend to break it down into three components. One is the strategic direction. Again, that top of the pyramid type people that are involved in that, right? The project champions, those who provide the charter, the business case owners of that entire effort. Then there's the operational directives. These are your project management office, the steering committees, people who make sure we are, how do we track feedback? What is the ROI that we are measuring against? Provide a consistent process that we are following. And then finally, the tactical direction, right? These are the project managers, the folks who actually execute on whatever it is that the Center of Excellence is delivering on, tracking the ROI, on establishing governance processes, right? So those two ideas taken together are going to ensure that a Center of Excellence is going to succeed in its mission. Yeah, expanding on that ideas, the same thing. You want to define, here are some more examples of defining goals. If you think of it from a DevOps perspective, for example, creating a standard vehicle for deployment. Now, how many times we've seen some developers who are using change sets. However, some developers who are using SFDX, some who are using Ant, for example. You may want to standardize on that development effort, development processes, platforms that you're using, deliver strategic business values through technical and process excellence. This is an idea, I'm a technologist, but this is an idea that is key as you grow and mature. All technical initiatives, DevOps initiatives included, at the end of the day, they need to be able to provide some business value. You have to be able to measure business value with the effort. Otherwise, getting buy-in, getting the necessary budgetary approvals, getting the necessary push behind the effort is difficult. And it makes sense. At the end of the day, a business is there to deliver values. It's there to improve ROI. So you should kind of keep that front and center throughout this effort. Similarly, there are some other example goals defined here. Apply research for innovative solutions, sharing domain expertise. This is another good one. How many times we've seen there's a lot of churn in our people, right? People leave. Joe really knew how to do this right. Now Joe's gone. Now what do we do? So how do we put together a process in place that expertise is not lost when we have people turnover? That maybe through documentation, maybe through training programs, what have you. So some more examples of goals that you want to settle on when you're thinking about putting together a Center of Excellence for your overall, ROI improvement.
That's 100% on the money. But when we think through from a DevOps perspective, some of the responsibilities that our Center of Excellence wants to hold dear, we often see them center around the three principles of DevOps, which are flow, which is taking the ideas that we want to, or the changes we want to make to production, pushing them through the pipeline, getting them live in production. And we'll usually measure these with things like release velocity, failure rate, quality code measures. The next would be feedback, which is all about taking the learnings that we've learned throughout the process and send them back to developers. These are things like, we can also look at failure rates for this, but as Chintan pointed to earlier, some of these logs and inspection reports, and especially looking at our technical debt measurements, seeing how much we have over time and how we're reducing it. But the third pillar of DevOps continuous improvement is arguably the most important for a Center of Excellence to own, which is all about taking the local learnings of teams and making them global for the entire company. Oftentimes, when we look at Salesforce practices at companies, they could have anywhere from 3 to 50 different Salesforce instances, and these instances are siloed, where they're not necessarily communicating with each other, they're not sharing best practices or lessons learned. And that's why it's so important to have a center of excellence available to you and utilized in your company so that it can be the vehicle that you can share these learnings to your entire company.
So when you put it all together, what is the impact that a center of excellence can deliver? This is one of my favorite slides. If you look at the current slate, flat line there, that sort of, think of any organization that's using a particular process or tool in place, and there's the current state flat line. Then a change is introduced. This is basically the idea of a center of excellence introducing a process improvement or a tool set improvement that's going to bring about change. When you do that, invariably 9 out of 10 times your performance is going to dip, and that's that transitionary dip. And that's pretty normal. Because it takes time for organizations and people to start embracing that new process or new change. And then eventually that curve's going to point upwards again. And now your graph is pointing upwards in the desired future state. So what is it that the center of excellence can deliver? It can help reduce that transitionary dip. As you build competency, as you build proficiency, that time that you spend in that transitionary dip is going to be reduced, and you're pointing upwards in the right direction, right? So again, if you look at these yellow highlighted terms on this slide, a COE is going to help improve efficiency by using its resources, identify changes. This is something that Jacob pointed out repeatedly. Feedback, the idea of listening and identifying what is it that needs to change, and then help sustain it. That's something that I talked about earlier as well. Is the change sustainable? This is a key idea in most companies, that once you bring about positive change, how do you sustain that? And to improve ROI. So again, if you think about a center of excellence from that 50,000-foot view, and not just DevOps, but any kind of operational priority, a center of excellence can help you improve efficiency, can help with standardization, can help bring about coherence, business coherence, process coherence, can help provide direction, right? The scattered ideas that abound within a DevOps organization or any organization, it can help provide direction and ultimately deliver what I talked about at the beginning of this presentation, accelerated delivery and improved ROI. So finally, just to kind of talk quickly about a use case that we here at West Monroe have seen a center of excellence bring about positive changes, was with a small insurance company, just like the many others that are out there, that was providing auto, home, motorcycle, other kinds of insurance through its various independent agents. And they were looking at growing and scaling up their organization, but they wanted to do that through metrics. Always a great idea, data-driven decision making. They were on a data analytics tool called Adobe or WebTrends. And so West Monroe was engaged to kind of help them identify how to make about increasing that scale. And we put together, the approach that we followed was exactly what we talked about. We put together first an effective framework, identified the leaders, the people who can be in place to bring about this positive change, identified the framework that we're going to use, the processes, started by looking at the current state, right? Always a great idea. Again, tied to that idea of feedback, identify current issues, identify current technical pain points, and then benchmark against a maturity model. And this is an idea that applies not just within the DevOps world, right? There are plenty of DevOps benchmark maturity models that West Monroe can certainly help you with, but they're out there as well. Any process, there are maturity model that you benchmark against, and you'd be surprised how many times we go to a client when we're starting an implementation and we ask them, a year from now, how are you going to know whether you've succeeded in this effort or not? And a lot of times we hear very fuzzy answers, because this is something that a lot of people don't focus on. Again, tied to that business value idea. Unless you are able to identify a metric, typically some kind of a business metric that is measurable, and then you benchmark at the beginning of that process, and then do that same exercise against at the end, how are you going to know whether you've succeeded or failed, right? So you need some kind of benchmarking. You need some kind of identification of a metric. That's your North Star that you're moving towards. That can help you clearly prove whether your Center of Excellence effort has succeeded or not, or any implementation has succeeded or not. So identifying that. So we help them do that. And as a result of that, they are now growing that team that does the analytics. They moved from web trends to site catalyst. And then the third big thing I want to point out is that we are helping them QA and make this a recursive process. So don't think of a Center of Excellence as a one and done type effort, but it is something that can bring about continuous change. Jacob talked about that as well. Continuous improvement. We talked about CI/CD in the DevOps world. This is an idea that applies to any business scenario. All businesses want continuous improvement, continuous delivery, and a Center of Excellence is one tool that can help you get there rapidly. Finally, if there's one thing that you can take out of this entire presentation, it is this idea. It's never too late to get started. Both Jacob and I have been involved in several initiatives at our firms where we see companies and clients and organizations at various levels of that maturity model. And if you tend to look at everything from in one go, it can be overwhelming and it can feel overwhelming. It's very easy to say, we just don't have the time, money, or the number of people to make this happen. But time and again, we see the sooner you start on this process, doesn't matter where you are, it doesn't matter how small the goal that you pick for your Center of Excellence, the sooner you get on this journey, the faster you are going to get to a state where you start seeing the benefits of this effort and start realizing the end goal, which was, again, improved efficiency, improved ROI. Anything to add there, Jacob?
I think I'm just going to echo you a bit, but I've been fortunate here at AutoRABIT to work with a wide array of customers, all in different various stages of their DevOps maturity model or cycles. I've worked with customers with 3 admins just promoting declarative changes into production, as well as companies that have had hundreds of developers just for one of their 30 Salesforce instances of their company. And there wasn't a single instance where having a Salesforce Center of Excellence would have been a detractor from their goals and their initiatives. So again, the earlier you can get started in forming this, framing this, putting the mind power and time and effort into designing this, the better off your Salesforce program will be in the long term.
Chintan and Jacob, thank you so much for illuminating us with that. I mean, if I look back throughout my career, I can think of certainly a few different places that could definitely use a Center of Excellence for their development strategy. So this has been really, really interesting. Cool. So I'm going to jump into some of the questions that we've had come in. So the first one that we've got is, generally, how long does it take to set up and have a Center of Excellence running?
Yeah, I can take that, Jacob. I mean, and that's a good question. Again, sort of, you look at the last slide, it kind of expands on that idea of it's never too late to get started. So when you think about putting together a Center of Excellence, there's no one answer to how long it takes, and it really depends on what it is that the problem that you're trying to solve. So again, if you think of it from a DevOps point of view, if it is simply the idea you've already got tools and people and processes in place, but the idea you're lacking standardization, and a COE is put together to kind of make sure that you standardize on a process, and you've got good reasons to standardize on that, then it can be a fairly quick effort. But if you're, and again, as you scale and grow your Center of Excellence, you take on bigger and more tactical, more strategic issues, then it can take a bit of a time. But this is where it helps to think of a Center of Excellence as not as a one and done type thing, but a part of a continuous improvement, continuous delivery type effort. So it is something that is ongoing. Once you put it into place, it's going to continuously evolve with your organization as you grow and as you develop, and it can help you even as your priorities change, even as the landscape changes, even the nature of the problems it changes, it'll grow and live with you. So I wouldn't focus so much on how long would it take, but rather focus on what is it that it can deliver, and let's get on that journey to get to that end result and end point.
Awesome. Cool. Right. The next question that we've got is if you've got multiple teams, so what if I've got multiple teams with different release strategies? How can a center of excellence kind of work with that sort of setup?
Yeah, Chintan, if you don't mind, I can grab this one. But it's something we see all the time here at AutoRABIT, where we start working with potentially one instance at a company is who might be at a, let's call it a middle of the road DevOps maturity. They probably have version control in place. They're leveraging proper UAT, QA testing, integration practices. But then across the cubicle or across the office, there's a company that's still doing manual testing. They're still deploying with change sets. And this is actually a perfect use case for why you may need a center of excellence. The ability to standardize all your teams and share that learning that different divisions and different instances are having, sharing that across the board and standardizing under one process, it's going to overall improve the efficiency of your entire company's Salesforce practice, not just a specific division. Another reason you're going to want to start to streamline those into one center of excellence to monitor is from a security perspective. When you've got multiple different release processes running in a company, it's hard to know which team is operating under which model. So if there is ever an instance where InfoSec is curious, hey, we've noticed this irregularity, you know, if you've got one standardized process, you know exactly where that's coming from. If all your different teams are using different processes, it's a little bit of finding a needle in a haystack to figure out where that issue arose.
Oh, that makes sense. Amazing. Right, the next one that we've got is what happens if you're unable to staff all the various roles for a center of excellence?
Yeah, I can take that. So yeah, I mean, that's an excellent question, and that's not so unrealistic. This is something we see at our clients as well. You know, when you bring about this idea of, hey, we're going to put together a center of excellence, and you want to make sure that your users don't feel like they're being force-fed. You kind of, how do you know, it's difficult to get everybody to get involved in an initiative unless they know, unless they can see some value. So this is where that idea of starting small, you know, starting with something, solve some small but meaningful, impactful problem. As soon as you do that, what happens? Your end users start seeing value, everybody starts seeing value, and that encourages participation. You know, one line of business starts to see the value that the change has brought about. Now the others want to get involved as well. But that's one way of doing it. The other is, you know, most organizations, for example, have some kind of a, and this is the time of the year where this happens, is you've got the idea of goal setting. Right? How can you get involved in improving processes or outcomes in your companies? This could be part of that effort. You know, as the word spreads of, hey, you know, my life has changed because of this process. You know, we were putting out 50 fires a month. Now we're putting out 2 fires a month because of this process improvement. That once that buy-in occurs, it automatically encourages participation, and then it's hopefully easier to grow and scale and staff your team and move on from there. So hopefully, you know, start small, but bring about an impactful change, make it happen in a reasonable amount of time, and you'll automatically see that participation and you know, scaling up improves with time.
Amazing. Thanks for that, Chintan. Right, the next one that's come in is why is static code analysis so important to a release strategy?
Yeah, I can grab that question. Static code analysis is essential in a modern dev process because while your business stakeholders, they're going to love changes hitting production, but what they're going to want more than that is to make sure that the CRM is live and active with no bugs in it at any given time. And static code analysis is all about finding bugs, vulnerabilities, security holes earlier in the process, well before they ever hit production. A study that was done, I believe, by Deloitte or IBM, I'm blanking on the agency, but they documented how expensive a bug fix was at various stages in the release process. If a bug hit production, it was 150 times more expensive to fix than if it was in creation, so in the dev environment. And for every piece of rework your devs have to do, every security fire drill you have to run through, that's time and resources being taken away from your sprints, from your release cycles. So the ability to catch these things earlier, address them often, hopefully in real time, will ultimately allow you to write clean, safe code to benefit your end users.
Yeah, and Jacob, if you don't mind, this is a favorite topic of mine. I'd love to add here. If you think back to the very first slide that we kicked off this presentation with, now what did we say? That there is dramatic change coming about in the way businesses are working, and the idea of digitization. What does that mean in real terms? That more online capabilities. And what does that mean? That means security becomes paramount. And earlier you were going to a bank or handing off, signing a paper form. Now you're doing that online. So information is online. And so security becomes paramount. And so when that happens, the idea of static code analysis, the idea of looking at how you're solving the problem technically, are there any technical holes in there, becomes not an afterthought, but it becomes front and center earlier in the process as well. The second thing is, you kind of said something about rework, right? The idea that rework is so expensive. A favorite story of mine to talk about is, I'm dating myself a little bit, but if you think about the end of Second World War and Japan was devastated as a country, and the United States put together a framework and a platform for industry standards, right? The idea that do it right the first time. Spend the effort up front rather than waiting for a problem to occur and then solving it. This is why Japan went on to become an industrial behemoth, because Toyota, Honda, these companies that put together a standard of making automobiles, and this can be applied in anywhere. The simple idea of do it right the first time. Before you deliver something, make sure that it is foolproof. That idea as well, begs kind of make sure that static code analysis is something that can help your organization deliver a solid, robust product.
Amazing. Thanks for such in-depth answer to that one, guys. Right, the next one that we've got is, if you have an established environment, what are some tips for documenting the current customizations in place to start revision control?
Yeah, I can answer that, Jacob, but then you can add in your ideas. But this is not an uncommon problem. So what happens in most organizations is you're so focused on delivering your end result that you don't think about support or sustenance, or it becomes as an afterthought. And then the other problem is churn, which I talked about earlier, right? People leave. There are only certain people who know certain parts of the process very well, and then they leave, and now you're kind of starting from scratch, right? So this is where the idea of organizational change management, or OCM, comes into play in my eyes. And it's a key part. A lot of companies tend to look at this as an extra cost when we enter, we talk to clients about implementations. They're so focused on delivery, they tend to look at organizational change management as an unnecessary cost that they don't want to take on. But a very good organizational change management effort can help with that. They can, right from the beginning of this process, they can help put together processes that are, for example, documentation, for example, training, for example, train the trainer type ideas. Can you put together a team within your organization that can train new people who come in? Onboarding, how do you onboard new people who come in? I talked about Sales Cloud. We deploy Sales Cloud and you hire new sales reps. How are you going to make sure they get familiar with your instance? Is it through documentation? Is it through videos? Whatever is most effective in your organization, right? So an organizational change management effort, and then communication, another key part of it, right? You don't want to send out an email to your team, next week we're rolling out Salesforce. It's a brand new tool, and it's going to change your lives. You don't want to do that. You want to make it very gradual. Everybody should be on board earlier. That's what ensures that sustained improvement, buy-in, and all of that. So that in short, sort of the answer that I'm driving towards is this idea of organizational change management that can help you identify in an existing environment what are the key pieces that you're missing, and then put together a plan of putting together a solution, documentation, videos, what have you, team of people, onboarding, or even it could be something as simple as this org management in Salesforce. Where are you making your changes? How are you migrating? When is check-in taking place? What is your branching strategy? All of that is something that an organizational change management effort can help solve. Anything you want to add to that, Jacob?
Yeah, no, that's all exactly right. It's funny when customers come to us, oftentimes they're so deep in the trenches with trying to get releases out that they don't take the time to step back and actually look at their process as a whole. And that's actually one of the things that we do with customers when we first start working with them is take the time to sit down and really intimately understand their release flow. And we oftentimes visualize that so that your teams internally, you can actually see what your release flow and what your strategy looks like today. And then that document, most times with the customers we work with, it becomes an artifact that their Salesforce Center of Excellence, whether it's early in creation or it's potentially more established, they use that as a guiding principle to help educate other departments and other instances as well. So it's a hard work, it's manual work, it's rolling up your sleeves. But once you do it, once you, as Chintan alluded to, once you get started, the benefits pay tenfold.
And a quick plug for AutoRABIT. You know, Jacob, you're very hesitant to talk about your own product, but AutoRABIT is one such tool that can help with all of these things. I see a question online whether, you know, there's devs can have a UI where you can quick deploy, kick off deployments, restart. Absolutely, AutoRABIT has a fantastic and diverse capability set that, you know, one of the best that I've seen out there that can help you do all of that. It can monitor, stop, start, download, CI/CD, all of that and more. So take a look at it if you haven't.
Amazing. Thank you, guys. That is it for all of the questions that have come in. So Chintan and Jacob, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today on this ever increasingly important topic. And yeah, I think we'll leave it there.
Awesome. Thank you very much, folks. I appreciated my time here. Thank you all.